Okay, let me set the scene. Lucky, imagine you're at a wedding. Beautiful gowns, beautiful dresses, drinks are flowing, and the wedding, it's at a plantation. Right. The wedding is taking place in Natchez, Mississippi, a small town that's literally been selling its history for nearly a century.
Our pilgrims, as we lovingly call them, come from all over the world to see these beautiful homes.
These wedding plantations are what pulled director Susanna Herbert to investigate these antebellum towns because on the surface, these weddings and historical tours do feel like they're preserving history. But in her film, she starts asking a bigger question. Which history is being told and who gets to tell it?
If it's a fairy tale, that's one thing. But if you then decide it's truth, that's dangerous.
That land literally has our blood in it. Our blood.
Wow, that's a huge question to unpack. And also, I don't know how people will have their weddings on plantations.
It literally could never be me, but that's why we have an educator here. He's a filmmaker and historian of the South and tour guide, EJ, to help us chat through these complicated topics. I'm Marissa Pina.
I'm Lucky Wynn. Welcome to PBS Film Club. Let's get into it.
EJ, we are so excited to have you on set with us to talk about this amazing documentary from Independent Lens, Natchez. You are an educator, a filmmaker, a historian of the South. The list goes on, a tour guide in New Orleans. There's so much about you that is amazing, but thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about the South. So, yeah.
So when we were watching Natchez, we saw that they referred to the tours as pilgrimages. And for me, I was like, that's interesting. We're talking about, pilgrimage, which is typically something like you were telling me about, like going to a holy land, going a pilgrimage to Mecca, for example. And so I was curious to kind of unpack that term a little bit more and see, like, since you are a licensed tour guide, like, what did you feel about that term? And what are your thoughts on the tours? Yeah,
it's really interesting. I think probably similar to what you just said. I think when I think of pilgrimage, you think of like someplace you have really deep connections to, right? It could be cultural, spiritual, all these different things. And so, so I was kind of thrown off about that a little bit too. I've never really kind of thought about it in that way. Obviously doing tours in New Orleans. I've never heard or referred to any of the, tours as pilgrimages or people coming to visit it as such. And so it seems a little bit intentional in some ways, but it also, that term really does, it's like you want to try to connect you to something. Because obviously that is kind of like the root way I kind of think of the word pilgrimage. So I think that initially kind of got my head turning, like what stories, whose narratives, who's telling those stories, and what is the connection that they want the people to make to that specific place, to the specific plantation house or house and things of that nature. So,
yeah, absolutely.
When you think of pilgrimage and like you said, you never thought about it being called pilgrimage and like, why are they calling it pilgrimage? It's giving marketing and branding, and there's an intention to pull people to this quote unquote holy land as something they can connect to.
And there's something to be said about the romanticization that you see on these tours. And I know that, in the film you see they're in the hoop skirts, they're giving very much Gone with the Wind. And I was just wondering, like, when you watched the film, did that strike you at all? Or was that not something that you really resonated with?
It's really interesting. I feel like because, where I live and the work that I do, I think I probably have seen it more often than a lot of people have seen it. And so, but it is absolutely this like fabric of the romanticization of this time period, right? Like you mentioned, very much the Gone with the Wind effect, things of that nature. But, as a person who knows the plantation in Louisiana my folks come from, like I'm also very cognitive, like what's the experience of the people that were not wearing the big skirts, right? Like they were, working and they were forced to be laboring on these places. And so it feels very much like we're trying to cover up another side of the story. And so, and a lot of it ties to like the history of like early Hollywood and things of that nature, and like romanticizing a time period that, was a tremendous, evil in the country, our country, when it comes to slavery, right? But then trying to make it like something it's not, right? And so Gone with the Wind was a movie that really played a big role when it comes to how some folks want to romanticize plantation life and what that looks like, but then also how it completely disregards the reality of the large population, the majority of the population of these plantations who were forced to labor on them and what that looks like. And so it becomes a really black and white view of like that time period. And so when I saw that, it definitely it reminded me of that time period in particular. And it kind of really is a stark reminder of like, okay, so this is the kind of view of, the story we're going to be seeing and kind of who's going to be telling the story, whose stories are not going to be told there. And so I think that kind of really stood out. So, yeah.
And when we are talking about these tours, of course, like we learn that they're run by the Garden Club in Natchez. And so the Garden Club is a group of women who came together to save the town by putting on these tours of, the antebellum houses or the plantation houses. And so we have a clip that we kind of want to play and we can kind of unpack it. So let's roll the clip.
That's the tea closet. At the time, it would have been locked because, y'all, tea and sugar were so expensive during that time that you couldn't afford for even a little bit of it to get pilfered by the servants. So the lady of the house would have worn that key around her neck, as I do today.
Yeah, when I see this, I have deep roots in Louisiana, so just across state lines, Mississippi. I know the plantation where my folks were enslaved at. There still is a cemetery there that people are still buried at. And so I spent a lot of time in terms of a Black historian on plantations and things of that nature. And so what I saw is something I've seen 1,000 times in terms of like doing tours, especially when I was really kind of doing a deeper dive, like Black history, my ancestors' history in the Deep South, things of that nature. But words like servants, right? Like it's very intentional. When I hear words of servants and what that means. And so hearing things like around like, hey, we have the key to make sure the sugar's locked, because sugar was very valuable in the time period, and particularly just a couple hours south of Natchez in South Louisiana, we have tons of sugarcane plantations. And so some people say cotton is king, sugar is queen, or sugar is king in Louisiana. But it was like locking and protecting it from who? From grabbing access to it, right? So I see those terms being very intentional because our ancestors weren't getting paid to do these things, right? And so you hear the word servant, it really is downplaying the gravitude of what and how large slavery was, especially to the economy of this country. It's things like that where you're telling stories, but then also like what other pieces get left out of the stories and like who was actually there doing the work. And so those things as a tour guide really come to mind really quickly. So, yeah.
Yeah.
When you talk about how all of our histories are interconnected, some people might say, well, let's leave the past in the past.
Promoting memory of something that was bad, it's over and done with, and I hate it. I wasn't here. None of us are here, Had I been here, I wouldn't have done it. Just have to keep reminding people of what happened 100 years ago, and if it's a bad, bad thought, don't remind them of it. If you're gonna take down all the statues, take down all the statues. You're gonna go build something there to promote what they're taking the statues down about, why would they do that? That's kind of what my thoughts about it. I'm not trying to be a racist. I'm not trying to be anything like that. I'm just saying.
What's dangerous about that thinking?
Yeah, that is something that comes up a lot. But for a number of us, the past is not the past in many ways, it's the present. And so, I live in New Orleans, and just outside of New Orleans, between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, we call the river parishes. And it's a great example to use. But when you go through, and really a lot of areas throughout the South, a lot of these little towns and communities, often called unincorporated communities, almost like villages in many ways, where they're smaller than towns, they're literally there because a plantation was there. So people that live there technically still living on what was a plantation. So people don't realize that like everywhere you're walking, these were plantations and things of that nature before they became a part of the city. And so history is literally there. It's what we choose to like actually confront, and then what we choose to ignore, or what is purposefully left out of the story. And I think that is where a lot of tension lies. So
I want to point out the irony of his commentary is like, it doesn't seem like it's about the past for him, because he lives in a town where 90% of the town makes their money off of historical tours. So it's like when you say, leave it in the past, but you live in the town that is.
Profiting off the past.
Yeah. So is it really about leaving something in the past?
Yeah, so often folks will talk about like plantation tourism, and it's very much the same thing. I think that's all the time is that like, so people were enslaved at a certain site, they sharecropped at a certain site, and now that site is still making money, but now it's talking of just, omitting their story, as I mentioned earlier, right? And so it's all still interconnected, like it doesn't stop. And so, so if that's the case, like, the past is the present. And so there is no way of separating that. We very much are intertwined together, and then figuring out how to tell the true story though. And that is what really can help shape how we think about the future though, so.
There is someone in the film that I think kind of speaks to what we're talking about right now. Her name is Deborah Cozy. One of my favorite perspectives in the film. She is the first Black woman to join the Garden Club fairly recently, so I'll put that into perspective. But she bought a home, and after buying the home, realized that it was formerly quarters for those who were enslaved. And so we have that clip so we can kind of check that out and see what we think about that.
I know that oftentimes people come to Natchez to see our big, beautiful homes, but you come here to see the kitchen. You come here to see the quarters. You're coming here to see my mother's collection of china from the A&P grocery store, huh? There is no old Sev and old Paris and that sort of thing in here. The enslaved worked in here and they slept above. Behind the big house is the rest of the story.
Yeah, I think the last few words is really heavy, is the rest of the story. So a lot of times, a lot of the tours, you often get kind of this romanticized version of it, right? Like the architecture, the dishes and the furniture, like who built the building, like who were those people, who were their names and what were their lives like, and who's in the kitchen, who's really kind of put the ingredients down for iconic Southern food and soul food and Creole food that we know and think about today. And so all of the rest of those stories, and there's so many of them and many names that have never been even really brought up. And so I think that was really important when I heard that part was like the rest of the story. And for me, I'm like, now that's where the story is really beginning. Like now we can really have a conversation, so.
Yeah.
I imagine there are people, and hopefully younger people, want to know more about that nuanced, complete history. So I'm curious, like, what are you seeing on the ground in your tours or on social media? What do people want to know more about?
Demographically speaking, online, I've got a number of comments from parents who are like, yeah, I have my children watch your videos. And so they can learn more about Black history or things of this nature. And those are coming across racial categories. As a matter of fact, one of the very first tours I did was actually from a white family from Alabama. And so initially it was not who I was initially expecting. It was like the first tour that I was setting up. And the mother had said very pointedly, like, I need my kids to know this history. And so I wanted them to take this tour from you so they can understand and get a more clearer picture. And so it really resonated with me at that point. There's a lot of people trying to figure out and learn the big picture, and they're trying to understand the stuff that they have not been told, or knowing even her own family story. She was kind of sharing there's stuff in, I think, that we've heard, but we don't fully know. And so like they want to know a more complete story. And so I think I'm seeing a lot of that. So whether it be online or in person, demographically speaking, it is very diverse. I do have a number of Black folks who are coming, also trying to connect with their roots in the South, and they want to know more about stories. Because sometimes maybe their families, they want to talk always about things that happen, and they want to see things up close and personal. And then other folks who are like, I'm just trying to understand the fuller picture of this country. And so I know this is an important part, and so I want to know that history, so.
Have you ever had like pushback on your tours where they try to like maybe correct you or try to tell their version of the history?
I have a lot of folks, fortunately, who really want to learn a lot about this, but I've had some people who sometimes kind of go with the, that's over kind of thing, like, that's done, it's done. And of course, I'm thinking, that still plays a role today. Like I said, everything that you can think of has a effect directly. And so it's not just something of the past. Like, you know, I've talked about this before, but I was 6 years old when I had my first experience with the Klan. Like, we were staying at a motel and there was a big Klan activity happening. And so people often see my face, like, you're younger, how do you have experience with like Klan? And I'm 6 and seeing people, you know, in full Klan regalia and things of that nature. And so this is, something that started many generations ago are still very much a part of our life today. And, you know, the fact that my grandmother did not go to high school because, you know, those laws and places where there was not Black schools readily available in the Deep South for. So all these things play an effect and a role to our very lived experience and moment to this very present time. So I think that's one thing I'm also trying to hopefully help people connect with, is that the past is the present, because it all interlinks together. You can't separate the two.
Yeah. It's not that far off either, you know?
Oh, absolutely not.
I want to talk about how film can also be a really powerful way for us to learn about our history and also reckon with it. And so, of course, like watching Natchez, I really immediately was like, Sinners. I want to talk about Sinners because it takes place in Mississippi. It's the 1930s. It's Jim Crow. It's sharecroppers. It's this perspective of Black joy and perseverance through what they had to live through and like being touched by slavery and being a part of that. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, so sorry, but it's about vampires. So it's not necessarily like a documentary by any means. It's a story about vampires who ruin a celebration of Black joy, which in that era was like very, very defiant of like what was going on. And to learn that Clarksdale was like 4 hours from Natchez was really interesting. But I wanted to know if like when you watched it, were you thinking of Sinners as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, also love that you brought up like often like our people, but regardless of what time period they're in, like they were looking for ways to have joy. Like they were still humans, right? And so they were looking for ways to create community and all these different elements. And so to bring the humanity to these stories are really important, whether they be enslaved folks or people sharecropping. And yeah, and so Sinners, of course, is based in Mississippi. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it. So it's based in Mississippi, but, you know, it really kind of, you know, brings the next part of the story in. You think of Natchez, particularly thinking of the days of slavery. But when I talk about earlier, like how many folks see sharecropping as an extension of that, I think of one particular part of Sinners that just like immediately stood out because they're, you know, one of the kind of conflicts of, and not to give too much of it away, but I guess we're kind of giving it away.
It's an Oscar-winning film.
So people have seen it by this point. But like, there's a part where like, you know, they're trying to, I figure out, can these folks come in because they don't have necessarily like regular USD to pay. They're paying in quote unquote plantation money. And so where my family's from, there's a big plantation and they use plantation money, but literally they would pay the sharecroppers money that was only able to be used on that plantation, which was literally a way of keeping them indebted to that place, right? And so there becomes this like kind of like conflict. It's like, should we let them still come in? This is not the money that we need, but it's like this is the money they have and being able to use. And so you see that, but I think that films like Sinners allows us a deeper look into Black culture, Black mythology, Southern Black mythology. I think Ryan Coogler did an amazing job with that. Quick shout out to a lot of my Louisiana people. You know, it's filmed outside of New Orleans, so I knew a lot of people that was deeply involved in the project. But a lot of us, you know, involved, or not me per se, but a lot of folks who are involved in the project are in the area, right? Like also people who live along the lower Mississippi Valley. So also becomes a project that's bringing a lot of people closer to like even their own family stories and narratives. But I think it allowed people to think about things a little bit differently. I think, you know, not just thinking about slavery in the 1800s, but how does that also look in the 1930s in a very similar way and style? And then the joy that our people are trying to enjoy, but then also how does things like racism, systemic oppression and stuff play a role into that? In this case, we can see that through the element of like the vampires and things and how that can be destroyed in a minute. And so, Yeah, I gotta go see the movie again. I've already seen it multiple times, and now I'm like, want to go see it again.
I love this. I love it so much. And like every time I think about the dancing scene with like all ancestors and cultures and generations to come, and then there's like the Misty Copeland of it all. I'm like, this such a beautifully shot film and so well thought out and well researched. And we talk about this a lot on PBS Film Club, but I think it's so important to tell stories with people who are a part of those stories.
Yeah.
Like for us, by us, you know? And you can really tell the difference there when you have that perspective and that knowledge.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
When you get a story that's fully inclusive and tells us a story, it can be really a really well done project, and a lot of people resonate with that. So I think that's kind of what people feel is like there was so much of that. If you look on social media, the amount of viral content around Sinners, because people's families from Mississippi, they're like, those are my people's stories. And so I talk about our elders knowing these stories. They're like, this feels reminiscent of like what I know. This is exactly what I was told. Even seeing elders recognize stuff. There were so many points in this film. I was like, yeah, I feel like my grandmother would have said something like that, you know, because it felt like that level of authenticity. And so I think that is the real benefit also of having the true, like the whole story being told about something, is that authenticity that then really shines out. So
Yeah. And I mean, I'm someone who's an avid like horror reader and a horror movie person. And so for me, I'm like bought in immediately when it comes to like the horror of it all. And when I was watching Natchez, I was kind of struck by how eerie it is. And I don't know if it's because I'm like from the Northeast or I'm like trying to be like, what's going on here? But like I was sitting there and watching it, and my husband like asked me to pause it so he could look at me and goes, do you not feel like this feels like Get Out? And I was like, you know what? I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I realized like it has that same eerie, like something undercurrent is happening that I cannot see and I don't trust it. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, with Get Out and Sinners, both Oscar winners, and then with Natchez and that eerie feeling, it's kind of like, what is it about horror that works so well about telling stories about race in America, and particularly in this case, Black stories?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that there's a lot of horror in some of these, you know, Black experiences and stuff. I'm being like completely transparent. And so I think that is like one thing. But I think also, because I'm actually a person caught on the opposite side. I normally like shy away from horror.
Yeah.
I'm like, horror movie, I don't want to go see it. I'm okay, right? I'm good. I'll be at home drinking tea, watching comedy or something like that. So, but at the same time, what I realized that's been really powerful is that it allows a tool to have like these deeper conversations, because it allows like, what are the metaphors, right? Like what are these things that it really represents in many ways? And so when you think of like Get Out and the comparison to Get Out and even this documentary, there are these elements and kind of undercurrents, right? And then for many communities across the country, and I know we're talking about like the South a lot, there is this kind of like, they're saying this, but that's not really the whole thing, you know, or is that the full story? And it's like this really kind of like elephant in the room thing, right? So there is this kind of like, you know, other character that's not being really centered, that is there, that wants to be seen or talked about, but we don't ever actually get into it as much as we should. And so I think horror allows for a unique genre to like dive into it in an interesting way. And so, yeah.
I think horror also like has become a tool for marginalized communities or communities that don't typically have their voices heard in the same way. It allows us to kind of reclaim narratives and subvert it and put people in our positions that might not have ever experienced that. And so I've been reading a lot of books that are like slave revenge plot kind of, which I thought, you know, I was just like really enamored by them. And a lot of them also are vampire centric and things like that, because there's so much metaphor about like reclaiming power and things like that. So yeah, it's really
absolutely cool. Yeah, there's so much metaphors in it. And really a lot of it is actually even true. Like so many people don't realize how many of like, you know, enslaved folks were planning these massive rebellions and things of that nature. And so I think of the 1811 slave revolt that was down in Louisiana. And so there's actually 2 amazing Black women, the Banner sisters, who actually have recently now have control of the plantation that they actually started in. So we're seeing a number of people who are getting access to these particular spots. That the goal was, being led by a slave guy named Charles Dessalines to literally make New Orleans a place of freedom for enslaved folks, pulling on things like, inspiration from the Haitian Revolution and things of that nature. And so, it's, these stories actually exist too. And so bringing them to light and talking about it. And so there are numerous ways, but to your point, I think it allows people to see a different dynamic and put themselves in those positions. So,
yeah. You were also a thing that you were talking about was you're saying a thing, but what are you actually saying?
Yeah.
That Southern politeness. I know you talk about it all the time to me, but I saw that so perfectly done in Natchez as well. And there's a moment that I kind of want to play for us that kind of encapsulates what do I say? How do I say it? But also I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
Let's see it.
The members of our garden club select from our youth a king and queen of pilgrimage. These were actually worn by queens of pilgrimage over the years, so they're just a beautiful assortment. For many years, the young men wore the Confederate uniform, and there's been a move against, let me see, I'll say this right. How do I say this? For many years, the young men wore the costume wore the uniform of their ancestors, the Confederate uniform. There's been a movement in the past 3 or 4 years to kind of reduce the, I'm going to get in trouble here.
First of all, a glimpse into me when I'm doing my TikToks is oh my God. But second of all, when I watched that, I was just sitting there oh my God, just say it.
Yeah. It's I know what you want to say.
Yeah.
It's exactly.
In the vein of people trying to get it right and not wanting to say the wrong things, what would you say to somebody who shies away from those conversations or confrontations because they don't want to get it wrong?
Yeah. Well, as a former teacher to many middle school students, and sometimes you gotta just have a starting part, right? You gotta have a place to start. And so I think there's one part I love when Rev was even referring to is hey, this is your time to ask a question. Just ask and just, whatever it is. Because some people don't know and they're really trying to learn and they might not necessarily know the right terminology of sort. And it's just go ahead and ask the question, right? And so that's the starting point. It's asking the question, understanding that there's more to the story. And I want to try to understand and being able to put that out. And so I encourage people. I feel when you do that, we understand that you're trying to learn, right? And that there is that willingness to be able to hear the other side of the story. So so make it more of a complete story.
That's funny that you bring that up because we like to ask our guests at the end. We ask you a ton of questions, but what do you want to be asked? What are people not asking you?
Yeah, so I think a lot that I think whether it be the content I make or even tours, is really wanting to know more about the humanity of our ancestors and that those that were enslaved. And so, we know that they were enslaved, but I don't think people often talk about the fact that these were families, these were mothers, these were doctors, these are people who were craftsmen, these are people who were, put in predicaments where they're having to live with each other. Oftentimes, think of maybe a slave cabin, but they could be random people that were not related being forced to live there, but they took each other in as family members and built those structures together. They had lives, they had dreams. I'm sure, had moments where they were trying to figure out how they're gonna do cooking and gardening, all these different things that the human elements often don't really get asked. And I think that's important we remember that they have all the same wishes and hopes and dreams and difficulties as well that we have under the guise, of course, in the oppression of slavery, but they have that as a human experience. And so I think it's important that we really humanize those experiences of our ancestors. So
Absolutely. I'm a big reader, so of course I want to mention another book that I just read, but they talked a lot about queer enslaved story, people who were enslaved who were queer. And I want more of that. I want, like you're saying, the humanity of that. I want to, obviously we all know that queer people have always existed and always will exist. And to think about them in those spaces I don't think we get the chance to really talk about it enough. And it was something that really struck me. But I also learned it was based on a real person's story, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like a part of it. So I feel like I said, we're just kind of getting to like I feel like in some ways the beginning stages are really kind of taking this like level back, but like everything that we see in terms of humanity today absolutely existed, 200 years ago. And so whether it be queer folks that were there, we think about, the motherhood and how that played a role, and like thinking about children, and then all these things that, that we kind of think about, even like trying to find moments of joy, trying to celebrate in the holidays. And so they're doing all the things, right? But just under the oppression of the systems of slavery. And so having to deal with that as well. But I would love if folks asked and wanted to talk more about that, the human element for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And I think with Natchez, the documentary, what we learned, and the question that they asked, like, whose story is being told and by whom? And then we have these films of sinners. And like you said, we're just starting to know more, and to be able to question and think more about it is part of everyone's push to like do better about stories and representation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the founding principles of PBS Film Club, and you guys should probably like and subscribe if you want to check out more conversations like this one, because we do this every month and it is so great and thought-provoking. But we get to really have these conversations with people who are experts in these spaces. And so I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to come talk about it. So I'm eager to see what the conversations are once people see the film, and hoping that people continue to look for the whole truth and all of the truth, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Whoa, what a conversation. I'm absolutely looking forward to watching the film Natchez completely here on the PBS Documentaries channel. We'll put a link in the description.
I can't wait for you to watch it. I know you're going to love it. And because we're your new virtual documentary besties, let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. And if you like this conversation, we cover a lot more documentaries here on PBS Film Club every month. Please be sure to share and subscribe and like and set up the notifications on all of that, because we really want to keep talking with y'all. See you next month.